Namaskar.
Namaskar, and I think we have about 5 minutes, but one thing I would really urge all of you is to keep going back to the Google Classroom website, because I'm continuously uploading material under different folders. And there were a lot of questions when I started checking the chat questions that have come in the last few classes. I kind of missed that feature in the recording, but now I have a list of questions. And I'm going to compile their answers and send them in the WhatsApp group. So are you all ready for the Indian Independence Day on Sunday?
Yes, as much as we can. We're not going to go to any rally because we're in Chicago, so they do have a parade here too, I think. But New York is the one which is, or
yeah,
I think New Jersey, they do a big thing.
Yeah, the Indian Association of Minnesota here has an annual event. They call it the India Fest. So it's on Saturday, the 14th of August. And then there are, then we are attending a private celebration, Indian Independence celebration event on Sunday.
Kind of a dinner meeting or something?
No, it's just some friends have organized.
This is your personal, okay.
Yeah, some personal friends have organized.
Okay.
We already did in NJ on 8th August. Yeah, I participated in that too.
Okay.
It's India Day Parade.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vishalji, if we want to start the classes soon in Chicago, but we want to be able to speak to somebody. Who's that person? We got Mr. Verma sent us an email. There was no contact number. So he's the person who should be coordinating with, right?
So are you talking contact from our end or?
Yeah, from your end, because he did send us an email saying that he's looking forward to meeting us when we're ready. But before we meet, okay, we have a few questions and we want to be able to talk to somebody, and I don't know who's the person.
Yeah, you can call me. I'm again sending my number in the chat window. I'll send it in the WhatsApp group also after this class, but I'm in Minneapolis, so not very far off.
763 number which just appeared.
Haji.
That's your number. Okay.
Yeah.
So all this material you are saying is for the classes is in the Google
Classroom website, and let me share that screen here. So I'm sharing my screen, and when you go to that Google Classroom, you click at that top button saying classwork, and then you can see the material under different folders 01, 02, 03, and these folders are numbered according to the week number. I went ahead and created a folder named Sunday Hindu School Textbooks. So these are the textbooks which are already, we've been using them for 10 years. You can just download them for free as PDFs. I'll make another folder. We have, so these textbooks are for a 1 year, 30 class program. But if you want to have shorter camps, 3 or 4 day longs, then we also have thematic textbooks. So our own Hindu Mandir Sunday camp, summer camp got done this past Sunday. So it was a 4-day camp, and the topic this time was nutrition and food. So I have a lot of those thematic textbooks, which I will upload, and then you can use them also for your any short summer camps that you might want here.
It's
And
Google Classroom. Is there a website we go to, or how does that work?
yeah, it's a website, and you can just access it very easily.
What is the website address?
This is the link. Let me also send it to you in the chat window.
Okay, appreciate that.
So someone has asked, adding another person. I think Rajiji will take care of that. Uh, we'll extract the messages from here.
Okay.
So it's 8 o'clock, and maybe we should first start with our prayers. And let me start sharing the Gayatri Bantra here. Om Bhurbhuvah Swah Tat Saviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I will start. First of all, I'll give a summary of what we did last time, and then how does this, what will we cover in this class, and then I'll make you familiar with some of the materials that we can use for this particular class. So let me first go to the website here. So I'm sharing the Google Classroom website. And, we had the introductory material. What is the purpose? Now, then the first week, the proper instruction week, we had an overview of Hindu Dharma. Last week, somebody asked me a question. He was going to do literally a 20-minute presentation at a scout camp. And so he wanted some guidance on what exactly can I present about Hinduism in a 20-minute camp, because these children will be from different religious backgrounds. So in response to his request, I uploaded this brochure called Unique Aspects of Hindu Dharma, because when you have only 15 to 20 minutes of talk time, you want to highlight the unique characteristics and inspiring and positive characteristics about Hindu Dharma. So this is a one-pager that you can use for those purposes. It highlights things like, of all the major religions, we don't have any Hindu terrorists, for example, how we live in harmony with the nature, how we respect plant life, animal life, how we are a very inclusive tradition, how we are one of, we are the only major faith in which divinity is also worshipped as in the feminine form. If you look at the Abrahamic religions, the divine is conceived of as an old, elderly male personage, whereas in Hindu Dharma, we equally look at God in the mother, as a mother in the feminine form. So it's a collection of some talking points that you can use. People had also asked me about some good introductory books on Hindu Dharma, which present our tradition from our own perspective. So this is a collection of some titles that you can use here. And then I'm still going to upload further things, materials here under the Gifts of Hindus class. Last week, we covered the 4 Purusharthas, which were Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So there are several slides that I presented, a bunch of a slide deck. All those are uploaded here, documents. We discuss certain class discussion exercises. So all of those are uploaded here as Word documents, and you can just download them. Now, this brings us to our next bunch of classes, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which will deal with our sacred literature, our shastras, our languages like Sanskrit and Tamil and many other languages in which we have a lot of bhakti literature. And so I treat these 5 classes as a single bunch, because although we discuss different sets of scriptures, but really we are talking about the same topic. So the way this can be a very boring and a monotonous section to cover. And so what I have done is, I've created different types of exercises. And if we were doing this class in person, I would also be able to show videos of Vedic chanting. And sometimes I've had the pleasure of inviting our temple panditjis who can demonstrate, the chanting of the Vedas. And they also explain to the students how much effort and how many years it took them to memorize a whole Vedic branch, a shakha of the Vedas. So the students get to know from that this is a very scientific way in which we Hindus have codified our dharma in the shastras. So what I have also done is I have uploaded some good reference books. So there is this book called Selections from the Vedas by A.C. Bose. And so if you want a ready reference to consult, some important Vedic mantras. Likewise, there is a book on the philosophy of the Upanishads. Now, this was written like more than a century back by a German author. In a hurry, I've uploaded it, but I think it gives a very comprehensive view of what the Upanishads really teach. And then this is a book by Bharati Vidya Bhavan, Upanishads in dialogue form. So these are all introductory books to the Upanishads for your own edification. And then there are these slides on the Vedas and Upanishads that we will cover today. So let me jump to the slides and tell you how I approach this topic with the student. Okay, let me share the screen here. Can you all see my screen now?
Could you please go on the presentation mode? Thank you.
Yeah, let me just first
you
stop
can
my
see in
video. Okay, now let me go to the presentation mode here. Okay, does this work for you? Can you see it in the presentation mode?
Yes, please.
Okay, so before I jump into the shastras of our tradition, what I do is I start with an icebreaker. It's kind of a discussion point. So I give this first page to the students and I ask them to spend about 10 minutes on it and write potential answers. And this is a very classic exercise that's used in philosophy classes, even here in the Western tradition. So it pretty much says that you're given a box of parts that can be joined together to make a working clock. There are many, many parts, and the process for assembling them is not easy or intuitive. How will you get the correct information to assemble these parts correctly to make a clock which really works? And I tell the students that keep an open mind, make necessary assumptions, and list all the solutions that they can think of. So what the students do is, they list all their possible answers. And so all these answers, when we start grouping them, it's, if you are in industry, they call it the affinity diagrams. But when you start grouping them, there are certain categories in which all these answers fall. So the students can say, I can get the clockmaker's manual. So person who has put these parts in the box knows how to assemble them into a clock. So I can, get that authoritative source of information, or I can, look up Google videos, I can look up internet videos, or I can use other manuals to other help guides to assemble a clock, or I can observe others. I can approach a person who's knowledgeable, ask him, for any guidance. If there are videos showing people assembling the clock, I can look at those videos. Um, However, then we also ask them, what are the pros and cons? Sometimes, when you look at the internet videos, they don't really have the right information. So the fourth figure is the fourth solution is that the student, or the person who wants to assemble these parts into a clock, can use his own logic, prior information, or just use some kind of a logical rational thinking and try to figure it out himself, that this part seems to fit into this part, so let me create a sub-assembly, and then the third part fits better with the fourth part, and try to wing it. And again, there might be a potential that you can assemble the clock maybe 25%, 50%, but not completely. The fifth way, that students typically mention is that you become an apprentice under a very competent trainer or a teacher who's done it many times, and you observe how they do it. They will probably do some hand holding for you. And so what I tell them is that for any interesting thing, or any complex thing that you want to learn, there are these 5 or 6 different categories of things that you can do to get the right information. And that is how the architecture of Hindu Dharma is created. In the Hindu Dharma, we believe that the person who made this universe is Ishwar, Paramatma, and his own manual, in which he's described the creation, his revelation is called the Vedas. Um, it is very unfortunate that although the Vedas are primary, scriptures, traditions, most people, if you ask them if they can name the 4 Vedas, they won't be able to name them. And so they are the Rigved, Atharvaved, Yajurved, and Samved. So I just create an acronym, RAYS, RAYS, and I tell them, these are rays of divine wisdom: Rigved, Atharvaved, Yajurved, and Samved. And then I give an example to them that a person who wants to learn how to use Microsoft Word can get a Microsoft manual on MS Word. But often we see that these manuals are written in a very dense language. They are very difficult to understand. And that is why you have these other books like Microsoft Word for Dummies, Microsoft Word for Idiots. And so in our Hindu Dharma, just like in real life, you can consult these other manuals. There are we have many other shastras like the Puranas, Ramayana, and Dharma Shastras, which explain the same things which are taught in the Vedas in a much simpler, approachable language. So likewise, just as we can Google up videos on assembling clocks from their parts or take apprenticeship, in Hindu Dharma also, we can read about the lives of Rishi Munis, how they acted in certain situations, and use them as our ideals. Or we can go to a knowledgeable guru or an acharya who's currently living, and seek apprenticeship from them. We can become their shishya. Or sometimes, if none of these means are available to us, then we have no choice but to try and use our own logic. And so Hindu Dharma also says that when none of these means are available to you to know what is right and what is wrong, you have to fall back upon your own, what your Atma, what your, Atma tells you. But, again, you use it when other means are not available to you. So what I'm trying to tell the students here is that the way in which we study about dharma in our tradition is very scientific and very logical, and it mirrors how we learn doing complex things in our day-to-day life. So then this brings us to the formal means of learning. um, the Praman Shastra, or the ways of knowing the truth. This is a branch of knowledge that is actually very unique to our Dharma. In no other faith, there is such a systematic description of how we can know the truth. And but every Hindu school of darshan or philosophy, I'm using the word incorrectly right now, it first starts with how can we know the truth? And these are all the different means that are listed here. And so one is, obviously you see with your eyes, smell, hear, and then based on what you know, you can do some inferences. If, for example, if it's dark and you hear somebody breaking a glass in your room, and other than you there's only a dog in the room, then the natural inference is that a dog must have jumped and tripped the glass and it fell to the floor and broke into pieces. So based on your knowledge, you draw inferences, and then you have these manuals, the different shastras, the scriptures. And the Vedas are the clockmaker's own manual, and for that reason they are the gold standard. It's pretty similar to the fact that if you pick up a idiot's guide to Microsoft Word versus the Microsoft company's guide on how to use Word, if there's a conflict between them, then you better follow what that original Microsoft guide says. So the Vedas, which are considered to be divine revelations in our tradition, they are the gold standard. And then we have a lot of the other helpful scriptures which are very commonly studied. Then we spoke about a personal trainer or ideal rishis who are exemplars in good conduct, who are very knowledgeable. But some rishis might have lived in the past. We cannot talk about them right now. We can only refer to um, their biographies or what people have written about them to learn about it. A guru might be living in our time, but sometimes one person might not have the whole knowledge. And then you go to an expert panel in your real life. If you're working, you call them SMEs, subject matter experts. You might have to consult many of them. So there's this other provision in our tradition. Then if you don't have access to any one of them, how do you decide what I should be doing? And so sometimes, if you do things with a noble intent, but the result is not very right, you don't get necessarily penalized for that. So here in the United States, I tell the students about the Good Samaritan Law, where say if you see a person dying on the road, you can try and help him with a good intent to save his life. But since you are not a doctor, you might accidentally land up harming that person, and it might result in his death. So under the Good Samaritan Law here in many parts of the United States, you cannot be taken to court for causing the death of that person because your intentions were good. And likewise in Hindu Dharma, they say that, our Shastra say that if your intentions are good, that's also considered a valid source of Dharma, even if the results, are not according to your intentions. And then finally, we have, our own conscience. So at this point of time, I do some interfaith discussion. It's in modern times, you often hear that, I should follow my conscience. And in Christianity and other religions, conscience is referred to as the little voice of God. And so I ask students as to what they think is a scientific perspective. Is there really something called conscience? And actually, modern psychology tells us that there is nothing called conscience. What we believe to be conscience is more of a result of our cultural, our upbringing, how we are raised. So then I give many examples to students. For example, a kleptomaniac is a person who is compelled by by his mind to keep stealing. There's a pyromaniac, which who's compelled by his mind to set things on fire. And then we talk about certain cultures in the world, where people believe that honor killing is the right thing to do. So they, if a lady of the household marries not according to the wishes of her parents, then her brothers or her other male members of the family can kill her. So it's not like these people don't have a conscience, but their mind is attuned to believing that that's the right thing to do. So scientifically, conscience is not very reliable. It's actually a product of how you've been raised, and so that is why in Hindu Dharma, very consistent with modern psychology and science, we place conscience at the end when there are no other sources. You don't have virtuous people to consult. You don't have examples of saints and rishis. You cannot consult the shastras, you don't know what to do from direct observation. That's when you fall back upon your conscience. Um, so sometimes people say, if I don't see it, I don't believe it. If I don't hear it, I don't believe it. And Hindu Dharma has a very sophisticated theory of how even what you see might be an optical illusion. What you hear might be a delusion. So what Hindu Dharma says is that the gold standard must be from a very authoritative source. And that authoritative source is the most authoritative source is nothing but the Vedas, the four Vedas, which have been revealed to us by Ishvara through the medium of rishis. So, so that is why Hindu Dharma says that, okay, what you hear, what you see, what you taste, what you smell has value, but in matters of dharma, the Vedas are the prime authority, and all other scriptures, all other rishis, they are authority only when they're consistent with the teachings of the Vedas. And if they conflict the teachings of the Vedas, then they are not very authoritative. And I teach this to them with an example. So for example, in the Hindu tradition, some of our later shastras, they say that women cannot get the yajnapavitam, the janeu. So it's restricted only for male children. And what I do is I first show them some smritis which say that, but then I open up the Atharva Veda, which has a mantra saying, Bhima Jaya Brahmasya Upanita. And then we also refer to some other scriptures based on the Vedas, which say that the girls can also have the Yajnapavitam. So what I tell them is that if we follow this dictum that the Vedas are the gold standard, then the later restrictions of women not acquiring Yajnapavitam, they don't really stand, and they can be rejected. So that's just one example that I give to them by showing them the actual wording from the Atharva Veda and some other shastras. So a good strategy to conduct this class would be, in our homes, we all have certain shastras. We have a Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharat. And so when you're teaching the children, it would be very beneficial to take a box of these shastras. I would also strongly recommend to buy at least a copy of one of the Vedas with the accent marks, and show to the students how how the Vedic passages look like in actual print, and Google up videos where Vedic chanting is Vedas are recited, and there are videos also which show how the Sama Veda is recited, for example, with the hand movements, and it's very useful for students to get a feel of that. So this is a chart which one of my teenager volunteers, when after the class, he drew up this chart. And he said that, what is the hierarchy of these different sources of dharma? And so we said that the Vedas, which are also called the Shruti, and we'll come to that why they're called Shruti, they are the most authoritative. And then after that, there are other shastras which are called the Smriti. Then we have the examples of virtuous people, great people who've lived. And then we also have our conscience. So there is a downward arrow here from higher authority to lower authority, from more generic statements to more specific statements. And then we have a discussion on why we have this hierarchy and why we say that the Vedas are more generic. For example, the Vedas might just make a statement that we should all be dressed modestly and protect our body against natural elements. Now, this is a generic statement, but if I live, say, in Kerala versus if I live in Ladakh, tropical climate or very dry and cold climate, how do you interpret this statement? You will the Smriti is more regional based. It interprets the Shruti or the Vedic statements in a more practical way. And so the Smriti might say, well, if you are in Ladakh, then you need to wear warm clothing probably throughout the year. Whereas if you're in Kerala, you need to wear light cotton clothing because it's hot and humid there. And so if you still don't understand that, and I give them the example that I live here in Minnesota. When I moved here up from Florida, which is one of the warmest parts of the United States, and I moved to Minnesota, which is one of the coldest parts of the United States, people told me, that you need to buy a down jacket. And in those days, we didn't have much internet. So how do I find out, what's a down jacket? And then people showed me, from their closets, hey, this is a down jacket and you can get it from this particular store. So that's what you learn from other people who set an example. And finally, if I came to a new city and I had no clue, all I knew was it's a very cold place, then I would, go to different stores and make a judgment on what would suit my, what would protect my body in the cold weather. So the question is, why is the example of Sadachar placed lower in authority compared to even the Smriti? And so I give certain examples that, I ask students to tell me of great men and women they know, but who did some really, some bad things in their life, because all good people do some mistakes, but we cannot use those mistakes to justify our wrong behavior. So, for example, Nelson Mandela, who helped South Africans come out of the apartheid regime, or even Martin Luther King here in the United States, who led the civil rights movement. They were great men, but they did some mistakes. They had women out besides their wife in their lives, and people cannot just point to them and say, well, they did it, and so it's justified for me to do it. So great men also make mistakes, and that is what our Dharma teaches us, that just because a great man or a woman has committed a mistake doesn't make it worthy of our emulation. We shouldn't copy bad behavior. Rather, the gold standard is the Shruti and the Smriti. In general, we should look at the examples from the lives of great people, but we should recognize that even great people can do mistakes. So there are many examples from the lives of great people that you can give to them depending on what your students are expected to know. And then we've already discussed why conscience is rated pretty low. So then we also talk about the guru. It's like a personal trainer who gives you personal attention, or you can go to a panel of knowledgeable people, and so we've talked about that. So we trigger some discussion in the class. Why is the example of saints regarded as less important than scriptures for knowing Dharma? And this is what we discussed, that sometimes even saints do mistakes. Valmiki ji was said to be a robber in his earlier life. But just because Valmiki ji is the rishi, we cannot say that, it's okay to rob people when they are on a highway. He turned a leaf, he became a rishi after he gave up bad habits. But sometimes rishis, after they have achieved spiritual greatness, can also commit mistakes. We all know the story of Vishwamitra, for example. So for this reason, we say that the conduct of saints is a good teacher on what to do and what not to do. But sometimes, we need to be careful how we are following them. We discussed this, why is conscience treated as a less important source of Dharma? And the reason is pretty simple, because conscience, there is nothing really called conscience according to modern science and psychology, and Hindu Dharma recognizes that. Whereas the Abrahamic faiths, wrongly think that it's the little voice of God within. There's nothing like that. Um, and then when do we use our conscience for as a source of dharma? And like I said, when there are no other means available, that's when we use our conscience. And this happens actually pretty frequently in our life. You have to take a decision at the spur of the moment, and a lot depends on the kind of training and the kind of upbringing, and the environment you've been raised in, that helps you make decisions. So again, why are good intentions not a very important source of dharma? Because a foolish person can have a good intention, but they can cause more harm with their good intention. Um, and we see many television serials also where somebody with good intentions totally ruins the dishes, the dish they are cooking. So Hindu Dharma says that it is very important for us to acquire knowledge and use our common sense and wisdom and study our shastras, keep company of people who are like rishis, who are like our gurus, so that we can consult them whenever we need their help. So with that, the rest of the lesson is focused on scriptures. And so I discussed topics like, some people say, oh, all these scriptures are written thousands of years back. They're not applicable today. They're useless. Or sometimes people say, well, the Muslims have the Quran and the Christians have the Bible. What do we Hindus have? And like I mentioned, it's sad that most Hindus cannot even name the four Vedas. And so we discuss all these questions. If you look at the PDF that I shared, it has extensive discussion on all these topics that the teacher should kind of preview before initiating this discussion. So to a take-home message that you can tell the students is that we are not a people of the book. Hindus are a people of the library. We have many, many, many scriptures, and there is a reason for that. One doesn't read the same book of chemistry in the sixth grade and seventh grade and eighth grade and ninth grade. You build upon prior concepts. You use different books of chemistry, and likewise, you don't only read a book of chemistry. You have books of physics and biology, English literature, mathematics. So there is a lot of knowledge and wisdom to be acquired, and acquiring all that knowledge, learning all these things makes you a very wholesome person. And so for the same reason, Hindu Dharma has a library of scriptures which are meant for people at different levels. They're meant for people who wish to specialize in different areas of Dharma. They are meant for people who have different kind of capabilities and behaviors and preferences. So that's the reason why we Hindus have a lot of scriptures. Um, Even for little things like a shirt, one size does not fit all. So Hindus don't believe that one scripture can necessarily meet the requirements of everyone. And all such claims are false. We are really not a one book, one rishi and kind of a community. We Diversity is built into our faith through accepting and acknowledging a diversity of scriptures also, while understanding that the Vedas are the gold standard. So then there are questions: why should I spend my time reading scriptures? How should is memorizing them enough? Is the learned person necessarily pious and spiritual? So I tell this to them through many, many different stories. And I'm not going to repeat this story since I narrated it last time. When we read our scriptures and learn about the right way of doing things, and we read them with faith, we see a lot of times people give up their bad habits because scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita help us put our lives in the correct perspective. What's important, what's unimportant, what is more important. And so then there's a story of Ravan who tried to lift the Kailash mountain, and you can read that story here. And then there's a question, is it sufficient to read them and memorize them? So this is again a beautiful story of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And once he attended a pravachan of the Bhagavad Gita there, and he noticed that in the audience there was an illiterate person who was constantly shedding tears while the Bhagavad Gita was being taught to the audience. So he asked someone else, who is this person and why is he crying? And everyone told him, oh, he's just an idiot. He's putting up a big show. He doesn't even understand Sanskrit. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not very convinced with that explanation, and he directly asked that person, why are you crying while the pravachan of Gita is going on? And the man said, when I hear Gita, I don't understand everything, but with whatever little I understand, it it appears to me that Bhagwan Krishna and Arjuna are standing right in front of me, and I'm filled with emotion. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, he got up and he said, look, this man is the greatest scholar of Bhagavad Gita, because your study of the Gita is only up to a mental or a level of understanding, whereas he has actually, uh, you know, for him, the Bhagavad Gita makes him see a vision of Krishna and Arjuna. So please, everyone, mute yourself. Then there is this other story, and if you read the PDF that I've uploaded, all these stories are there. This is a story from the Mahabharata. Just like in our life, there are no shortcuts to mastering any subject. Similarly, in even for our shastras, there are no shortcuts in learning. And we all have very busy lives, but I tell my students that try and set aside 5 to 10 minutes every day and maybe pick up a Bhagavad Gita and just randomly read 5 to 10 verses, and in a period of some time, those verses will start making sense to them, and they will grasp what the Bhagavad Gita is trying to tell them. So this is a story that you can read there. Um, then a lot of people ask us, is it sufficient to, read the scriptures? And as you know, in the Sanskrit language, there is a pretty interesting tradition of sometimes depicting pandits as foolish people, who are not worldly wise. So and so this story is about, a pandit who was crossing the river, and the boatman was rowing, and this pandit started asking the boatman, have you read the Vedas, have you read the Upanishads? And the boatman humbly replied, and he said, Panditji, I make a living by taking people across the river, and it's a very hard life. I am not very literate, and I have really not read the Shastras. And then suddenly there's a storm, and the boat starts swirling and getting sucked in a vortex. And then the boatman asks the Panditji, have you learned to swim? And Panditji said, no. And then the boatman says, well, I'm so sorry, sir, then you will not be able to save your life. So what I try to tell the students is that, okay, just like in your real life, you can master all the books of physics and chemistry and biology, but you also need to have some life skills, like, how you interact with people. And likewise, our tradition never does not claim that reading the Shastras is a substitute for common sense and worldly wisdom. So the two things go hand in hand, and they serve different purposes. There's a story from Hitopadesh and Panchtantra about and so this is another story that I recite. And then there's this other story which is set, which is narrated with regard to the Bhaja Govindam, hymn, where Bhagavad Pad Shri Shankaracharya saw a man on his deathbed trying to master the Vyakaran, the Sanskrit grammar. And he has compassion for this man. And he says, when you are in trouble, all your wisdom and knowledge might not help you, but it's only Paramatma who can give you moksha or liberation. So this story is to emphasize the fact that we can read the Shastras mechanically, but if it does not elevate us spiritually, then their purpose is not really served. And this is another story that I narrated last time. So so this kind of gives you some time to keep the class engaged. And I mentioned in the very first class that our curriculum is very story-based curriculum. We try to incorporate as much discussion, and you do give this additional material to the students, because those who are truly interested will make it a point to read that further material. So we've been using these two terms, the Shruti and the Smriti. And what exactly are these? And so I tell them that all our sacred literature is classified in two main branches, the Shruti and the Smriti. So you have the four Vedas, which have these four different parts, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. And then you have all the other literature, the Smritis, which have Vedang, Upaved, Dharam Shastra, Itihas, Puran, Stotra, Agam, and Darshan. One thing to be kept in mind is that there are many Hindus who classify the Agam and the Tantra also under Shruti. And it is, a lot of Hindus believe that these Agam and Tantra Shastras were also revealed by, for example, by Bhagwan Vishnu and Bhagwan Shiva. So, but all Hindus don't accept that, but nevertheless, they have high regard. So what is the difference between Shruti and Smriti? And so see, these are some definitions. Shruti is what the rishis in a state of meditation heard from the divine. So it's the divinely inspired or revealed sacred wisdom that is compiled in the four Vedas. Now, in every society, as civilization advances, we learn from what our forefathers have invented or created, and then with each generation, that memorized knowledge or that learned knowledge, passes on to the next generation. And so the interpretations of the Shruti and whatever we've learned in the passage of history is captured in the Smriti, which is why it is called Smriti, memorized or traditional wisdom. Whereas Shruti is that which you hear, and it's not just memorized or traditional, it's spontaneous. Any person who is spiritually enlightened, we Hindus believe that any person who's spiritually enlightened can see or hear the Shruti directly. And therefore, Shruti is eternal. It's in present tense, in past tense, and in future tense, whereas Smritis are traditional scriptures which were composed in ancient times and which could be composed even, in modern times. So these are the two major classes, and the Shruti or the Vedas are the gold standard against which all the other, sources of Dharma are validated. This is a good diagram to show them the library of our, sacred tradition. We have the four Vedas, and currently they exist in 12 different shakhas or branches, under which there are 20, like we said, that these gold circles, they are the Shruti or the Vedas, Vedic literature. And there are 20 Brahmanas which survive, There are 6 Aranyak Granth which survive, over 200 Upanishads. And then we have all the Smriti literature. So they total add up to maybe more than 10,000. Now the question is, nobody can read all of that. So this is a very useful table to show to the children that if you only can read one scripture in your lifetime, if you are busy, or everybody's busy, then you pick up the Bhagavad Gita. It's underlined in bold. Typically, Hindus will read Ramayana. Amongst the Darshan Shastras, they will read about the Yoga and Vedant. Dharma Shastras, amongst the Puranas, they will read the Vishnu Puran, the Bhagavad Puran, the Shiva Puran. And amongst the Upanishads, we said there are more than 200 of them, but 15 of them are major. Sometimes people only, they draw the line at 10. But again, these 4 are the easier ones. And if you read these, it's quite sufficient. But if you want to pick only one, read the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe you can go to the Ramayana, read a little bit about the Kat Upanishad, Kain Upanishad, and Mundak Upanishad. So it's very important for us to familiarize the students with what the Vedas are. We spoke about the 4 goals of human existence, and the Vedas actually teach us sufficient, they give us sufficient knowledge on how to reach all these 4, scriptures. They are the oldest sacred literature of humanity. And so I tell them about, what the Rig Veda talks about Saraswati as a fairly strong river, and the river, even if one wants to look at them historically, the Saraswati River kind of dried up around 1500 BC, and so that kind of shows that the Vedas are way older than that. So the unfortunately only a portion of the Vedic literature survives, but whatever is important has survived. And even the surviving portion is 6 times the length of the Bible, and it's at least twice as old. So, if we say Jesus existed, lived 2000 years back, the Vedas are at least 3.5 to 4,000 years old, even, by conservative estimates. And the other marvelous aspect of the Vedic literature is that most of the, a lot of the important Vedic texts are still preserved through memorization, letter for letter, word for word. And so I show the students a copy of the Rig Veda. Specifically, I show them the edition of Satavlekar. And what it tells us is, in the introduction, Satavlekar says that the entire Rig Veda has around 400,000 letters. And today there is a dispute. If you go to any part of India or Nepal where scholars have memorized the Rig Veda, there is a dispute for only one letter in the entire Rig Veda out of roughly 397,000 or 400,000 letters. And even there, with the help of grammar, you can fix, you can make a decision on what the correct letter should be, whether it should be ba or it should be pa, and so so then, this is the extent. The 4 Vedas have over 20K mantras. So earlier in the class, I mentioned if you go to the Google Classroom website, I have uploaded some nice anthologies from the 4 Vedas. And when I conduct this class in person, I show them some videos of Vedic chanting. Um, we sometimes also invite the Panditjis. And I think I would really recommend that if you have scholars in your community, you should have them come to a classroom and demonstrate how the exact text of the Vedas has been preserved. So the Vedas have different, they have the pada part, they have the krama part, and then they have the vikritis. And so if you have access to a scholar, definitely bring them and explain to the students how the different words are jumbled together in different permutations to make sure that not even a single letter is memorized incorrectly. And so in addition to the core Vedic literature, there are several hundred other texts that explain the Vedic literature. So one very important aspect of the Vedic literature is that it's accented. And so, I show them copies of the Vedas, but here's an image from the Rig Veda. So people who are familiar with the Devanagari script will notice that there are these, horizontal and vertical red colored marks in addition to the text. And so then I ask the students if they can think of any modern language which where the pitch changes while the person is talking. And this might not be something people in students in India might know, but because there's people from all over the world here, a lot of students can correctly point out that when the Chinese speak in Chinese language, the pitch changes from word to word. And so that's the similar to what the Vedic languages. There are these pitch accents. In ancient times, I tell them there were many other languages which had this pitch, accents, like the Old Greek, the Homeric Greek. in which the Iliad and Odyssey were written. And so the question is, why is the Vedic language accented? And this is not really a very correct example, but I write a sentence on the board, a sentence like, Shyam visited my home yesterday. And then I ask the students that if I were to say it as Shyam visited my home yesterday versus Shyam visited my home yesterday, what's the difference? I mean, the wording is exactly the same, but by stressing on different words, I kind of change the implication or the meaning. In the first sentence, in the first case, when I said Shyam visited, it meant that it was Shyam who visited and not Ram or Lakshman or, Krishna. And, well, Shyam means Krishna too, but, and so when I said he visited my home, I was emphasizing the point that they came to my home and not to my school and not to my office. So likewise, in the Vedic literature, when we have these accents, it helps the scholars understand, what is being stressed upon. And then, Sanskrit also has a samas, conjugated language. And how do we split the words correctly? Uh, so one nice example is that in our current modern day times, the word asur means, the opposite of sur, which is devta. Whereas in the Rig Veda, wherever the word asur is used, it is not split as a plus sur, not the opposite of sur, but it's split as asur, asu and ra. So it has a totally different meaning, and the word asur in the Rig Veda is used purely to mean divinity. And so that's the point. The meaning and the wording of the Vedas has been preserved very very systematically. And then, this is the four Vedangas. Students, when you teach them, they don't have much perspective, but what you just tell them is that just like for mastering any, say when you want to be a doctor, you have to take certain classes in chemistry and biology. Likewise, when you really want to master in the Vedas, these are all the prerequisites that you have. Phonetics, grammar, and how advanced our language and grammar is something we go into that later. And likewise, this is what we call the Upangas, the 6 Darshan Shastras, which are covered in another class. So one of the most important portions of the Vedas are the Upanishads. And typically in modern times and for many centuries, when Hindus use the word Shruti or Ved, they primarily mean the Upanishads. And these Upanishads are typically found in the concluding parts of the Vedas, and they are the most widely read of all the other portions of the Vedas. And even the common man today can, when they want to read the Vedas, they will typically get a translation of the Upanishads. And the reason is that in the Upanishads, the focus is on these very fundamental questions that everybody wants to understand. What's the nature of the supreme being? How did this world or the universe get come into creation? Who am I? What happens when we die? What is the purpose of my life? What role does Paramatma play in this creation? Why did Paramatma create this universe to start with? What kind of a relationship do we have with Paramatma? What is the ultimate goal of my life? And when I achieve liberation or moksha, what am I doing at that time? So these profound questions that a lot of people ask, even if whether they follow any specific religion or they don't follow, I mean, these are pretty common questions. And the Upanishads provide answers to these kind of questions. So then that brings me to another story, and I use the rest of the class to narrate the story from the Kathavalli Upanishad or the Katha Upanishad to drive home how the Upanishads talk about these very profound topics. And, I mean, we are an adult audience. We have just 7 minutes left for discussion, and, but for the students, it's pretty useful that, Nachiket came back from his college, and when he returned home, he was a very thoughtful child. When he came home, his father was performing a grand yagna in which he was giving a lot of gifts to charity. And Nachiketa noticed that his father was giving away useless and skinny cattle which did not produce any milk. So he said, "This is not right. My father should give more useful things as gifts and not just the useless cattle." So he said, "It's as a child, it's my duty to help my father." So he started pestering his father. "Whom are you going to gift me to?" And the father's like, "What a silly question he's asking. He's making fun of my gifts to other people." So when Nachiketa persisted in asking that question, and again, I'm rushing. This is not how I do it in the class. It's done in a more storytelling way. The father got very upset and angrily he said, "Nachiketa, I am going to gift you to Yamraj, the Lord of Death." Um, and since he was a rishi, even though he said this in a fit of anger, his words came true. And Nachiketa immediately, he passed away and he reached the abode of Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, where he waited for 3 days. But Yamaraj came only after he had waited for 3 days. So Yamaraj felt guilty and he said, "Since you have waited, you're a child and you've waited here for 3 days, you can make three wishes." And so Nachiketa asked for two wishes. The first one was that may my father, forget his anger for me. And so, think about it, that his father sent him to death. And yet, the one of the things he asked Yamaraj was that his father should shed his anger and he should be cheerful. So that was the very first boon as a really marvelous son that he chose. So likewise, he chose a second boon, but the third boon was something remarkable. Um, and Nachiketa said, "You are the Lord of Death, and therefore you are the best person to answer this question. What happens after we die?" And Yamraj said, "Look, this is a very important question, but I would offer you other things in lieu of answering this question. I can give you chariots, I can give you musicians and other things which will make you happy and pleased in your life. So take those instead of the answer to this question." But Nachiketa said, "No, I want the answer to the question I have asked. I don't really care about all these riches and delicious food and drinks." So then Yamraj started talking to him about what happens. We are born, we become adults, and then eventually we die. So before explaining to him what happens after we die, he gave this beautiful analogy of a chariot. And he says, in this chariot, you have an Atma, which is the master of the chariot. And then you have a buddhi, an intellect, which is the charioteer. You have your sense organs, which are like the horses, and the chariot is your body. Now, if these horses are disciplined and kept under control by your buddhi, then they will drive very smoothly and fast towards your destination. But if these chariots are not trained correctly, if they are not under the control of the buddhi and the buddhi does not listen to the master, then the horses might pull in different directions and they might even throw off this owner from the chariot, which is like, dying. So these chariots are like the senses. You have the sense of sight, you have the sense of hearing, you have the sense of smelling and so on. And if your senses are not um, disciplined, and you get addicted to certain things, for example, if you get addicted to say something like chocolate, and if you eat too much chocolate, then it can cause issues like cavities in your teeth and other health problems. Or some people, they get addicted to certain fragrances which give them a high. So this is like having indisciplined horses, which can really even lead up to your death. So so what happens after we die is that the soul is takes upon another body. And so this is a discussion I narrate to them through the story. And then we have this summary slide here. that the chariot is the sharir, the body, owner of the chariot is the jeev, the soul, and so on. And then we have a discussion, what will happen? How can the chariot owner reach the destination, which is Bhagwan? You can do that only if the chariot is sturdy and stable, which means that you have to be fit and healthy. Your intellect should be wise and full of wisdom, and you should tightly control your the pulls of your senses. If you, for example, if one is trying to lose weight, then you should not just keep eating, oily and calorie loaded food. You have to discipline your tongue, and your horses should be trained. Conversely, if the chariot owner or your soul can be thrown out of your body and never reach Bhagwan, if you have a chariot that breaks down, or the charioteer is foolish, there's a typo here, and if you don't control your senses and your mind. So the Upanishads summarize this by saying that everybody has a choice to make in this life. Sometimes people choose things which give them instant gratification, instant pleasure, whereas wise people choose the options which might be painful to start with, but which has a good result towards the end. For example, if somebody has 100 rupees or $100, they can instantly go and watch a movie in a theater, or somebody might just invest it and eventually make more money out of it. So I have certain class exercises where I give them very real life examples of students and how they make bad choices in school and colleges, and maybe I'll upload that on the website. And then I ask them, whether they are following the path of the pleasant or the path of the good. So one question that students often ask me is, what if the path is both good and pleasant? And yes, that can happen. You can have an option that gives you happiness, and that which is also good for your from a long-term perspective. But if you have to choose between instant gratification and between what's good for your long-term progress, then you should choose the path of good. So this kind of gives them a flavor of what the Upanishads teach about, and how they do a lot of storytelling, examples, and very charming stories, and so they teach about very profound concepts about what's our life, who am I and where do I go when I die, why did Paramatma create this universe, and how does he what kind of a relationship does Bhagwan have. So this story, which is in the Kat Upanishad, focuses on who am I. I'm the Atma. I am not the chariot, which is the body. I'm not the charioteer. I'm not the horses. And how should I live in this life? I should make choices which are not just instant gratification. I should keep my horses under control, and I should make the choices which even though might not be very pleasurable initially, but they provide permanent happiness later on. And how do I do that? I do that if I take care of my body, I eat healthy, I keep my mind under control, I'm disciplined, I train my senses, and I restrain them. So, these are all very relatable examples. So with that, we have come to 1 hour. And now I'd like to open it up for discussion. So this is a class in which we gave some brief overview of what the Vedas and the Upanishads are about. And so any questions?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Chandra. Earlier in one slide, you showed under Dharma Shastras, Manu Shastra as well.
Yeah.
But I myself read some contents of Manu Shastra, which do not necessarily feel it is the righteous thing to say a few things that I have read.
Yes.
So is it the same Manu Shastra that I have read, or is this a different Manu Shastra, or is my understanding or interpretation wrong?
So the the Manu Dharma Shastra that exists today, it does have some interpolations in it, but and we also need to understand that that's what we said, that all the smritis are based on deshkal. They are not eternal like the Shruti. So there are certain teachings in the Manu Dharma Shastra that are not applicable today, and we should reject them. Having said that, I also want to emphasize that when you read the Manusmriti, for example, when it talks about, is there any particular section that you want to discuss? We can have a discussion on that.
Yeah, I know there are some sections which are surely not in consonance with the current way of life. And also, I felt, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel it need not necessarily be listed under Dharma Shastras. That is number one. Number two, I felt it is about some learned Brahmin probably seeing this vagaries and this disintegration of values and losing out the skill sets, whether it be in one particular varna or other varna. So I felt more like an angst that a learned man or a scholar of those times has observed and has written it. That is what I felt.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there are many theories of when and who wrote the Manu Dharma Shastra. According to its own internal testimony, it is the teaching of Swayambhuv Manu or Vaivast Manu, and neither of them were Brahmins. They are considered as Kshatriyas in the Hindu tradition. So, the first belief that Manu Dharma Shastra is a Brahmin scripture is contradicted by the Shastra itself. Now, having said that, even in the Manu Dharma Shastra, there are a lot of sections which appear to be mutually, contradictory. For example, if you read the section on, should we eat meat or should we not eat meat, or what kind of marriages are permissible, and so there appear to be a lot of ridiculous options given, which no sensible person will accept today. And so my take on that is that, like any comprehensive textbook, it lays down multiple options or multiple views which were prevalent in his time, just like you said. And so the question is, what was Manu's own opinion? So there's a Shastric convention that when there are multiple opinions laid down one after the other, typically the last opinion is what the author himself subscribes to. And so once we follow that, understanding, a lot of the problems in Manu Shastra get resolved, but there are many other issues which we cannot accept. I mean, for one, it creates a very, very hierarchical society. There is symbolism along different varnas everywhere, whether it's the danda that the brahmachari carries, the height, what kind of material should be used for the yagya pavitam. So there are all these issues, and so one has to use our common sense and see what is applicable today. Now, whether we should include it in the category of Dharma Shastra or not, that is, it is there. I mean, I cannot remove it, but we can ignore it. That's what my reply would be. There are a lot of things in Manu Shastra which nobody can accept today in his, correct sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because especially when he speaks, goes on around speaking about intervarna linkages and the outcomes of it, he goes bit,
Yeah,
uh,
casteism and the hierarchical nature it's a curse on our society. And I would gladly acknowledge that Manu Dharma Shastra kind of promotes it. And so one has to just pick out what is beneficial in the Manav Dharma Shastra and then leave out the rest.
Right. So on that note, also, when I discuss with many of the friends or in public spaces, usually what I tell them is, hey, there are 1001 books. I'm just quoting that number just like that. So there are 1001 other books, but just taking few instances of content from one book of around thousands of books out there is not fair, I say. Usually that's how I try to approach it.
And that's a very interesting perspective you gave, because 3 or 4 classes down the line, we will be seeing how dharma is contextualized and what our rishis have said, how to arrive at a decision. And one of the things they say is that one must look at many, many different perspectives and sources. Um, and so,
Because if you see most of the Hindu bashing, I mean, I'm just taking one more minute before I pass on. Please do not mind. So if you see either in India or any anti-Hindu groups within United States or in the Western world, they usually burn the Manu Shastra book and then they talk around that book only. So what I say is, out of there are thousands of books. Okay, whatever is written there, we are not saying it is the correct one, but we are saying it is just only one of the 1,000 books. Can you please read the 999 and come back to us, kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah, very true. I mean, and so what I'm saying is, that, we need to learn about Dharma from many different sources. But, as you know, a lot of people, if they say, which one book should I study? I have not seen anybody recommend Manu as the one book you need to study for Dharma. I mean, typically they say you read Ramayana or you read the Bhagavad Gita,
Right, but I'm saying Hindu bashers usually they just burn that book or misquote or take content out of that book and
Yeah.
then try to malign it. So
Yeah, most of those people haven't even read what,
so
Manu
I'm saying the
says.
answer, yeah. But my answer is okay. That's fine. We are not saying no to that. But there are thousands of other books within the Hindu dharmic thing, like Upanishads,
Yes,
Itihasas,
definitely.
Puranas,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah, or commentaries. We certainly want them to also, read them and then come. So what happens is when he reads the varied nature of the darshanas of the different rishis, and to what extent of deep dive they have gone sukshma into each aspect of life, then what happens is the individual's ability, when he outlays by reading only Manu Dharma, will water down. You understand that?
Yeah. Well, no non-Hindu will ever adopt Hindu Dharma by reading Manu Dharma Shastra, but there will be
Yeah,
many who will read the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads and Ramayana and feel attracted towards that faith.
correct. I mean, I'm saying this is more for the anti-Hindu and the Hindu bashers.
Yeah,
I'm talking.
people who have an agenda, they will, you know, pick up a straw man argument kind of a thing and then use it. And
Yeah,
like I
thank
said,
you.
I personally, it's my firm opinion that a lot of the teachings in Manu Smriti we should just ignore them.
Yeah, so I think maybe for all practical purposes also, or for your thing, maybe we should take out Manu from the Dharma Shastra itself. Maybe I don't know. I'm just
Yeah, so one example which I gave earlier was that sometimes the Dharma Shastras say things which are contrary to the Vedic teaching. So, for example, a lot of some Dharma Shastras will say that the Upanayan can only be done on male children. But then, again, I open up the Atharva Ved and show it to them that it specifically says that girls can also have an Upanayan. So, so the corrective of Dharma Shastras is to constantly compare them to the gold standard, which is the Shruti, and neglect or ignore what contradicts the Shruti. Any other?
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me see.
Yeah,
Any other question?
wanted to add further discussion, right? So it's basically the Western narrative, right? It more towards what they want to fit into their narrative, right? Hinduism is always like alien to them, right? Even for the most scholarly, what you call as academic scholars. In
Yeah,
most
I
of the
don't even
colleges.
know what these academic scholars have really contributed in our understanding of Hindu Dharma, sometimes. And so one of the topics that we will cover towards the end of this whole program is this academic Hindu phobia. I had planned on doing a whole series of videos on that. I have actually recorded 2 of them. And now that you mention it, I'm going to post the links on the Google Classroom website. They're on YouTube. And they take 2 specific examples. One is of Paul Courtwright and the other one is of Wendy Doniger. So they don't really shed light on our dharma in their writings. They rather shed light on their own minds. When they a lot of times when they're writing perverse interpretations, it's a reflection of their own perverse intellect rather than what our shastras really say. There's a question, is there a recording we can hear again? Yes, it's recorded. Again, the links are sent in the WhatsApp message. Okay, any other questions and comments? Is there a Google Classroom? And yes, there is a Google Classroom. And we can send the link again in the WhatsApp group. But if you even go up in the chat here, that link is posted here. This is the link. Let me post it again here. Any other comments, questions? Does any one of you need any copies of any particular Shastra translation? Because I do have a lot of digital versions and I can post them for you. Can we get the recording by mail? No, there are two WhatsApp groups. Rajiv Ji has created a second WhatsApp group because the first one got full. So he can add you to the second WhatsApp group and exactly the same information is sent on each of those WhatsApp groups. Link for the second group, please. Okay, what you can do is you can send us an email with your phone number. And I'm typing my email here, and then we'll add your number to the WhatsApp group. If you want, if you have any other question, you're most welcome to email me as well. Class code, please, for Google Class. That part I don't know. Oh, it looks like I'm typing everything to just the admin. Okay, maybe I can, we can just say the closing prayers unless somebody has any other questions. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhag Bhavet Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The last thought that I will mention to you is that it's good to read the holy books of all religions, and those who think that they can beat us using Manusmriti, you just need to read the holy books of other religions, and you'll find that we are lucky to be born as Hindus, and we are very, very privileged that we follow Hindu Dharma. It's truly the really something that we should be very thankful to Paramatma that that we are following this great Sanatan Dharma in our lives. So thank you very much. Oh, there are some last chat questions. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.